Hello, I'm Dr. John Harding. I'd like to welcome you to our program, Raising Children with God. The title of this program is God in America. It's our 4th of July special, and our special guest for this program is Father Paul O'Connell. Father Paul.
Nice to see you, Doctor.
Thank you. Father Paul is the pastor at St. Mary's Church in Shrewsbury, and we've done a few specials. This is our 4th special now. We did Christmas and Easter and Halloween, and now we're doing 4th of July. And we're going to talk about God in America for this special, and in preparing for this program, I kind of thought about America's beginnings, and a little bit of that is on the table. This is actually a 100-year-old book of Psalms, and our flag and the drum, of the fife and drum. And it seemed like we started out this nation a couple of 100 years ago with God very much in America. One nation, founded, indivisible, under God, and in God we trust on our coins. And that third line in America, the beautiful, God shed His grace on thee. And about 100 years along, Abe Lincoln, when slavery was acceptable in some quarters and legal, he declared a day of fasting and prayer and humiliation for this nation over slavery, that we should pray that it end and that we should feel humiliated and that we should make a fasting offering to God that He'd help this nation. And it worked. Maybe we should do it again with some of the problems we have in this present, have our president declare a day of fast and prayer and humiliation. And Ronald Reagan did make an effort in 1989. He declared a day of prayer for this nation. And I think that we did very, very well, and I do think there's been some slippage over the last 30 years. I think along with that slippage, I see as a causative factor pushing God out of our lives and out of our priority position. I think if Americans sort of wrote a diary of their typical week and put the columns of how much time for television and how much time for sports and how much time for prayer and church and God, that column would be pretty slim and pretty empty. And I kind of see that as one of the major reasons why we're having so many problems. And maybe just for the beginnings, if you'd comment a little bit on your perspective on God and America now and at our beginnings and in the middle.
Well, first of all, in the beginnings, it's quite evident that people came to these shores for the freedom to worship, because they didn't feel that freedom was being recognized in some of the lands in which they came. And so, first of all, the pilgrims that came to our shores were looking for that freedom, and they celebrated it well. In the course of time, and I'm not going to analyze history, and everybody has their own views, I think that once you begin to recognize people's freedoms and their rights, then people also begin to recognize that you can't impose your way of thinking and acting and believing upon other people. And I think we've gone to that polarization in recent years with the challenge that comes to us from people who don't believe, saying that they feel that us saying that this is a nation under God is a violation of their right not to believe, and things of that kind. So you get this kind of clash of rights and freedoms. But I think, to put a positive note to it, I think if you look at the polls that have been taken by most major organizations and even the popular magazines like Time and Newsweek, you find that there's a tremendous interest in religion and church in this country. Now, does that say that every person goes to church every Sunday of the year? It doesn't mean that so much, but it shows that there is that struggle to find a meaningful type of faith and a relevant God, or a God who is relevant and says something to them in the complex issues of the day. I think you'd find, too, that even though if you ask people to delineate their schedules and their times, they may not spend an hour in church every week and on Sunday, but I would venture to say that God is present in their life, and they recognize that from time to time and moment to moment during the day, even though it's not formalized on Sunday. Now, obviously, I'm prejudiced, and I'd love to see them formalize it on Sunday by gathering with like-minded, faith-filled people to worship and thus to enrich our nation, too. But people express their faith in various and different types of ways. They have the freedom to do that in this nation.
You know, I see a lot, I'm a pediatrician, and I see the infant and the toddler and the child and the adolescent. And I often see everything going along pretty well most of the time up to adolescence. And then I think the waters start to get a little troubled and a little choppy and sometimes downright rough. And then I see a turning to God on the part of the parents and trying to get the children also with them to turn to God for help when they have a very, very serious problem. It could be a drug problem, it could be a psychiatric problem, a suicide gesture or an attempt. Mm-hmm. It could be a sexually related problem, a young girl is pregnant, or now we have teens and young people being diagnosed with AIDS. And then I see this turning to God and raising God up to a much higher priority position for help. And I through this series and in my practice, I've just more and more thought that, you know, if I were to do my parenting experience over again, we have 4 children, I wish I could have from the very beginning a higher priority position for God, you know, so that there's thanks to God from the very beginning that if the infant is born normal, have God working, the parents asking for God's help, that the infant will continue healthy and that they'll raise the infant well and teach them prayers, you know, along the way and be very real when they pray, when they go to church, that they're really there, you know. I mean, so many times I went to church when our kids were little and I wasn't there physically, but I wasn't there intellectually or spiritually. I was 100 other places. And I think children are very shrewd and wise. They saw that or they see that in us as adults. Mm-hmm. And we're going through the motions, we're kind of doing the minimum to keep us out of hell or whatever, and we're tired, of course, and distracted, but I'd like to see it enthusiastically brought into the parenting experience from the beginning, right throughout, and then, yes, maybe crank it up in adolescence, but not begin it, or not just then emphasize it or prioritize it.
Truly. There's an old adage in education that goes, character and virtue is not so much taught as it is caught, meaning that children, as they grow up, begin to imitate what they see all around them, and they quickly pick up what's important in that home. So I agree with you in terms of you've got to start a child at a very, very early age to be aware of faith, religion, the priority it has in the home, religious symbols that might be around the home, whether they be Jewish or Christian or Orthodox or whatever great religions there are in the world, that children grow up with an awareness of the Lord's presence. And they'll only catch that if parent is celebrating that type of an awareness too. And that's why I always try to impress upon young parents when they come to bring a child for baptism that it's more than a symbolic gesture. When that child leaves the waters of the baptismal font and returns to the parent's home, that life has to be celebrated all around it. And that it's not just a one-time event and occurrence. Children pick up very quickly what's priority and what's top values in the life of their parents.
I think they can see if something is fake. I think people who feign to like them but really don't like children, I think they pick it up. And I think the same with religion. I think if our faith is kind of fake or superficial or not sincere, they pick it up. We may think that we fool ourselves, I suppose, and we may think we're fooling others, but they pick it up. And I think that, you know, our nation now and the world, we seem to need so much help from God. I think Ronald Reagan's Day of Prayer, maybe it should be once a month. We should have a day of prayer for this nation. But it kind of went, and it did make the paper, and I think there was some notice taken of his day of prayer, but I don't think it was, you know, greeted with the enthusiasm of some of the commercial holidays. And so it was a very much second-class citizen in the realm of holidays. And yet, I think in this day and age, it should have been a top holiday.
Yeah.
or top day?
Well, because you have to look to the media for part of the problematic there, because, and there was an article in the papers recently in terms of how the media treat religion. And do they understand it? Do they have reporters who are sensitive to what faith and religion is all about and the events that occur within religious groups? To say that this is going to be a day of prayer for this nation, I'm not sure is greeted by the media with tremendous enthusiasm. But, for example, 4th of July is coming up, and it's a wonderful day for families, and it's a wonderful day to celebrate our freedoms, and to do that within the context of faith, to put faith in its proper context there, I think is so important for families and for the churches and for public figures. Now, they run into the problematic of separation of church and state. I know that. But nevertheless, there's plenty of room to integrate those two so that they're not violating the freedoms of people, but that they see it within the context of just life in general, that we have values that we celebrate that we feel are God-given values. No one should be ashamed of being able to publicly state that.
I know I have a problem, and I know our treasure in this nation is freedom. And each individual is entitled to freedom, and it's valuable. And yet, we seem to be so obsessed with this individual right to freedom of everything that we seem to have lost our common sense. You know, I have this feeling about prayer in the school. You know, graduation ceremony, that some person, a clergy person, can't invoke a prayer. Or the children who, you know, in just the course of a lesson in history or geography, the teacher would you know, something would remind her of God, and that she can't mention that, or that he can't mention that. It just seems that we've gotten this obsession with freedom, and we've taken this vast majority of people who still in this country, I think, are not atheistic, and we've kind of swept that all away for this very, very small minority, I think. And somehow that doesn't strike me as common sense.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't strike me as common sense either. I'm not sure how the small minority who press for not having this process imposed upon them feel about that. But I still maintain that there's plenty of room, flexibility for people to express faith and values in prayer and turning to the Lord God in so many aspects of life still. There are some religious people who don't feel that prayer has a place in the public school system. And one, just in the newspapers recently, it was a clergy person who supported not having prayer in the public school system, feeling that there were all kinds of other opportunities and that their way of life shouldn't be imposed upon all of the children. I don't believe that, but nevertheless, I think that within the system itself, there's always room for moments that will be comfortable for all people, believers and unbelievers alike.
I've often thought that, I've been thinking about this prayer in the school and evicting God from our public schools, and that there could be a religion class in our public schools, an hour a week or 15 minutes, half an hour a day. Mm-hmm. And there could be choices, and the parents could pick. Do they want their child to go to the Protestant religion class, the Catholic, or the Jewish, or the born-again Christian, or the Muslim, or the atheistic class? Mm-hmm. And then the children could disperse to their religion class, or a religion class, and have their half hour. Mm-hmm. And it could be very free and an integral part of the system, but yet there, so that they could see these teachers and these people that they admire and look up to, mm-hmm. integrate this in their education. You know, we're about at the middle of our program, and we have a great treat this 4th of July. Viola Jefferson, who's a good friend and neighbor, and you know